Back Friday, as they say. Derek Dunn, Rob Ellis, Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. Just wrap things up with Matt Lombardo of Heavy on Sports. If you missed any of that or any of our interviews that we've done during the week or any segments you want to check out, just go to jakibsports.com or JAKIB Sports YouTube channel. All right, Gunnar. So here's our Eagles question of the day. Bigger concern for you. The players lost or the coaches lost? Now, let's run through what they lost on each side here. CJ, GJ, Hargrave, Marcus Epps, TJ Edwards, Kaiser White, Miles Sanders, Isaac Seumalo. I'm just giving you the highlights. I know there were other guys that left too, but they're the sort of big boys. Shane Steichen, offensive coordinator, also play caller. Jonathan Gannon, defensive coordinator. Nick Rallis, who goes from linebackers coach to defensive coordinator in Arizona. They also lost their secondary coach, among some other lower level guys who have taken other gigs. They've elevated Brian Johnson and they hired Sean Desai. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Where would you go with this one? Bigger concern for you? And everybody in the chat, please chime in.
I would say right now it would have to be the coaches lost, because the coaches moved the chess pieces, and put them in place. And I know I was not a big fan of Jonathan Gannon, but what they did, you can't take away from it. And again, we understand they didn't play against the top-notch opponents, but they were dominant when they had to be. It's not their fault. They didn't make the schedule, but they went out and dominated basically everybody they played in a number of categories. If Shane Steichen is considered one of the best offensive minds in the game, that's a big loss. Jonathan Gannon, whether you like this defensive scheme or not, he put his people in the right places for the most part, except GJ said he didn't in the Super Bowl. But for the most part, his players were in the right places to be one of the top teams in terms of takeaways, one of the top teams in terms of overall defense. Because there's such a big mystery, a big question mark about how these new strategic pieces will move the chess pieces with the players, I have to say the coaches, because we don't know what we're getting. We know what we had. If Rallis is supposed to be this next great defensive mind, all of a sudden now he's in Arizona with Gannon. We don't know what we have in place. I mean, let's face it, I've seen so many teams that were loaded with talent but weren't coached properly, and the overall product suffered.
Good point. Because I think, Derek, when you hear the question right away, you're going to say players. Oh, 11 sacks for Hargrave. CJ GJ had 6 interceptions, and, solid guys like Epps and Edwards. You're going to say, oh, it's players. But, we don't know. I think we all feel good about Brian Johnson.
Right.
But we don't know if he's going to have the feel for calling a game the way that Steichen did. It's not like it'd be different if Nick Sirianni was calling the plays. Brian Johnson's going to be calling the plays. We don't know how that's going to look exactly.
Right.
And then you go to the other side of the ball, and I get it. Everybody's just going to say, hey, thank God Gannon's gone. But the only thing I would say is, Sean Desai's kind of an unknown. Like, I know he's done this before, but he didn't do it to great success in Chicago. Not necessarily his fault, because they didn't have real good talent. But he hasn't done it successfully. He is a Vic Fangio disciple, so careful what you wish for, because he's going to give you a lot of what philosophically Gannon gave you, I think. And then losing Rallis, who is a very well thought of guy around the league. Like,
absolutely.
There's a lot lost there, coaching wise.
And even they did hire from within in certain spots, but it's still not what you had, because they're going to want to put their own niches on it. How closely will Nick Sirianni monitor what Brian Johnson does? Now, granted, he's been there with Nick for a while, so they understand each other. Brian understands what worked, but he still has to make decisions. If Nick is going to allow him to call the plays, then his decision-making process is going to be a little bit different than Steichen's. Right. Okay? Steichen had already done enough at this level to be regarded as a premier offensive mind. We don't know that with Johnson. Decide a one-year sample as a defensive coordinator. We don't know in an elevated role here with better talent if it's going to work. And I do agree that the X factor is deciding this, but everybody has to keep an eye on this relationship between Patricia and Darius Slay. That could cause a lot of unwarranted tension on that side of the football.
Great point.
If this thing gets too tense. And it's Camelot now, but when people start yelling, when things as good of a season as you have, you do have those moments where things don't go as well.
Yeah.
How will that situation be handled, especially if one side doesn't like the other and takes exception if that one party calls them out in a situation? That could blow up as well. You don't know.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And where I think that could also get tricky is the start of the season if they're all not on the same page, which would be understandable because they've had so much turnover there, that it could take the defense a little while. And that's when things start to get – look, when you're winning, it's like with the ultimate deodorant, right? But when you're not – or let me put it this way. If early on, if the offense is really carrying them and they're having to put up 35 points a game, then there starts to become some strain maybe, where the defense gave up 31 again, whatever. That's where you could start to see the little cracks. And Slay's not a guy to bite his tongue. Let's face it. If he doesn't like what's going on, he's going to speak his mind. I mean, it's just the way it is. You're right. That's something to keep your eye on. And again, I'm not scoffing what they lost. Hargrave is an incredible pass rusher at the defensive tackle spot. Epps was a solid safety. We know TJ Edwards was a tackling machine. They're good players.
Yes.
But I'm with you. Like, I would lean toward the coaching. I think it's going to be pretty smooth with Brian Johnson, but ultimately we don't know for sure. Hey, it's 3rd and 2. What are you dialing up here? And Steichen had a pretty good feel for what to do there in those situations. So that's one to keep your eye on, with both of the coaching staffs on each side look like. And how much of a role does Nick try to play with both of them because they are in their first year as coordinators? He might have to be a little bit more involved. Not to say he wasn't, but a little bit more this time. Less autonomy, maybe.
And see, that's another thing. A head coach wants to lessen his role on game day. Will he have to babysit more on both sides of the ball? Obviously, he's got to watch this thing closer than he did last year because he had a good feel for who he had under him. He feels good about who he has now, but you have to see it.
Yeah.
With Brian Johnson, with Desai, you still have to see it. As a head coach, as the field general, you closely have to watch and listen to the dialogue when Patricia speaks and how Slay responds. Mm-hmm. That's huge. Mm-hmm. Those things can't be overlooked.
I agree. And that's where you'd love to be a fly on the wall. I mean, how much of this stuff is going to come out publicly? I don't know, but yeah, eventually people do talk. All right. So we are 65 days away from the season opener, Derek, 18 days away from training camp. So we're 2 weeks from Tuesday before training camp starts. Just thinking about this today before the show. In terms of depth, you look at their defensive line, you look at the Eagles' offensive line, certainly their first 2 receivers, maybe the cornerback spot where you have Slay, Bradbury, and Avonte Maddox. They have pretty good depth at certain positions. Yeah. Where would you say they have their greatest depth?
I would have to go offensive line. Jeff Stoutland does such an incredible job of cross-training people. It's unbelievable. You look at their starting 5, as good as anybody in the National Football League. Then you look at those backing them up. You can plug Sua Opeta in at guard or center. You can plug a Jack Driscoll in at guard. I'd rather see him playing a guard more so than a tackle. They still have Brett Toth there. They have Josh Sells there. They have a lot of players that are integrated in this system that if one player goes down, this offensive line really doesn't miss a beat. We saw that happen, sporadically last year. And because of that, this offense, the engine of the offense is the offensive line. And because of their depth and versatility, I feel better about the offensive line in terms of depth more so than any other position. And wide receiver, we have question marks after the first 2 receivers. You could argue running back. Defensive line, it looks pretty good, but we have question marks about Jordan Davis, and so on and so forth. The back end, we feel good about the corners. Safeties, we have question mark about, and the depth at the corner. So I would have to say the offensive line.
Okay. I'm going to go defensive line.
Okay.
So I look at it from this perspective. You're bringing back Brandon Graham, who was a double-digit sack guy, Josh Sweat, double-digit sack, and I'm going to call Nakobe Dean an edge guy rather than a linebacker. You bring those guys back. You bring in Nolan Smith, who was a first rounder, who a lot of people had going way higher than 30, where the Eagles grabbed him. And you also bring back Derek Barnett. That's just on the outside. That's just your edge guys.
Yep.
Then you go inside. You still have Fletcher Cox. So you do still have experience. You have Milton Williams, who has experience. Yes, Jordan Davis didn't get much, but he got a taste. Then you have a guy who was considered maybe the second or third best talent, period, coming out, in Jalen Carter, who you got at 9th. At your defensive tackle spot. You got pretty good depth there too. Not to mention, Marlon Tuipulotu, who had a pretty good year last year till he got hurt. There's other guys that you could throw into that mix as well. Like that's not bad depth. I know it's a little bit more unproven definitely than the offensive line. I mean, the only spot you don't know about is the one guard spot, along the offensive line. But I think there's a really high ceiling for that D line. I really do.
I don't disagree with you, but my question mark is as phenomenal of a talent as we've seen Jalen Carter be at the collegiate level, and all the experts love this kid. How quickly will he get acclimated at the NFL level? How much can Jordan Davis elevate his game? Can Jordan Davis sustain for 17 weeks at 35, 40, 45% playing? Those are huge question marks. On the offensive side, we've seen everybody that I mentioned play at some point.
Right.
And I'm not discounting Jalen Carter could be rookie of the year, but you got to see it. The players transition at different rates. Some you can just drop in, all of a sudden they're just a natural, but it goes to coaching.
Yeah.
How will the coaches coach these guys up? You got defensive coordinator now in Jordan Davis's ear. He had Jonathan Gantt. True. You got a new coordinator who's trying to motivate a Fletcher Cox. Hassan Reddick, Brandon Graham, they'll take care of their own. Josh Sweat, they'll take care of their own. But you got a new voice over there. And you wonder how long will it take us to see this defense as a whole gel, especially in the trenches. And if you're integrating Derek Barnett back into that, will he be all the way back from that knee injury?
Yeah.
What are we expecting from Derek Barnett? How much has he matured? Will his penalties once again override his physical attributes? I don't disagree with you, but when you asked the question when we were talking about it in the show meeting, I said, it came down to me, okay, what's a given? The offensive line is a given. We know what we have along the offensive line.
No, I look, and I'll go to your point on this.
Yeah.
When you have Jeff Stoutland, I don't think there's much argument. You have the best position coach in the league coaching those guys up.
Yeah.
So even though you might have a couple of like I have no doubt he'll get Steen up to speed really fast, and cross train him at the guard or the tackle spot, whatever. He could handle both. Yeah. I don't have any doubt about that. That's a great advantage. You can plug guys in who maybe aren't quite as talented, who just know where to be, are fundamentally, technically sound.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference a lot of times. That's all you need is that half second to either protect a guy, or if you don't, he gets hit.
Absolutely.
So
there's no question.
Big.
And Rob, Stoutland's body of work over the years, you look at how many different offensive linemen have come through his system. His system is tried and proven year in and year out. But there's such a big question mark about what the other side is going to look like under new leadership, under new voice. Individual talent, no question. The likes of Reddick, Cox, Graham, Sweat, even Milton Williams, no question. But again, how will they be strategically used? Percentage of plays, down, distance, when you attack. You're not going to blitz much, but you're going to have to blitz at some point. When you play the likes of Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, you have to blitz at some point to get them uncomfortable, get them off their spots. How good will Desai and Patricia be at doing that? The combination of the two be doing that with the personnel that they have. I'm excited to see it, but we just don't know yet. We don't know.
Well, I'd say this, though, about Barnett. I think if you're seeing the same kind of undisciplined stuff, it's going to be a super quick hook. It really is, Derek. Like, I don't think they're going to give him a lot of rope. Like, he does. If there's any of that stupid personal foul crap, he's going to be. He's either going to be gone or sitting on the bench. Like, they won't deal with it. They won't tolerate it. It's not a coincidence. Remember 2 years ago, Nick's first year, the whole when they the lip reading thing. Oh, it's always him. You remember that?
Oh yeah,
on the sideline. I'm telling you, man. Like, that happens. That stuff starts happening again when you already have it like. Preconceived notion in your head about that. There will be a short leash. I'm telling you.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah. Coach Marcus. Yeah. He was already sick of him before he got hurt. He's right. That it was an interesting they brought him back. Like, I think they do have good depth there at the edge position. I do. And I think that's going to benefit them in a big way. But the other thing with the offensive line, that I think really helps is you have a guy like Jalen who could get out of a jam. Simply put, I mean, there could be a situation where somebody gets beat, but he's going to save your rear end because he's going to escape what surely could have been a sack.
The offensive line is first to admit Jalen makes them look really good.
Yeah.
And even when they make mistakes, see, we don't see the mistakes because Jalen makes a wild play out of a bad situation.
Yep.
But when they sit down and look at it on film, the coaches and the players know exactly what they were supposed to do that they didn't do. When you have a quarterback like a Jalen Hurts that can bail you out like that, it makes your job a lot easier.
Yep. Well, you bring up, I think, a very interesting you brought up a position. And I probably should have thought of them when I was thinking about what positions have depth. But, running backs deep. They may not have the Saquon Barkley, Marquis, Derrick Henry guy. Yep. But in terms of like 4, I'd stack the Eagles 4 up against pretty much any team in the NFL.
Couldn't agree with you more. There's not many teams that can go 4 deep. And I don't mean just 4 deep, 4 quality deep. They're all proven entities. We know the history behind 2 of these guys. But when they're on the field, man, they bring so much to the table. Even Boston Scott. And I can't say this enough. I'm shocked that Boston Scott decided to stay here instead of going somewhere else where he might have a little bit more of a prominent role. He wouldn't be a feature back, wouldn't be your feature back, but could have had a more prominent role. But look at where he is as your number 4 back. Are you afraid to put Boston Scott in a game situation? No. We've seen this body of work. He doesn't fumble the ball, tough little runner, good pass catcher, has a great burst. He's your number 4. I'd stack them up against anybody in the National Football League in terms of running back depth.
I'm with you. Look, I'm with you. That's And each guy can do little, like we know Boston Scott's really good against the Giants, but he's also very good in goal line. Gainwell's very good in goal line. Gainwell was a phenomenal pass catcher coming out of Memphis.
Absolutely.
Or Memphis. He was incredible. So and so was DeAndre Swift. You got to be drooling if you're Sirianni or Johnson with the versatility you have with that group too.
There's no question. I mean, you've got the pass catcher out of the backfield, open space, and DeAndre Swift. You've got the banger between the tackles and Rashad Penny, who has potential to be a 1,000-yard rusher, but won't be in this system. Gainwell, we know what he's capable of doing both in the running and passing game. What else could you want? There are teams that are struggling to find a 2-deep backfield, let alone 4 deep. I can't say enough about the depth on this team. There's only so many balls to go around, and I think it's going to come down to whoever has the hot hand is going to get more reps in a game. That's what it's going to come down to.
I think so too. I think it's just a matter of, and look, the offshoot of that is hopefully you keep these guys a little bit fresher and a little bit healthier, right? I mean, that's the offshoot of the way you're going to go about it. But I just think that you're also talking about 2 guys. I'm talking about the primaries here with DeAndre Swift and Penny, who are on 1-year deals, who have some things to prove in terms of showing that you can stay durable. Look, that's a position you don't get paid much to begin with. You really need to show out if you want to get a multi-year or a nice contract next year if you're one of those 2 guys. So there's major motivation, for both of those guys to play well.
I could see your lead running back having 700 yards rushing on a season, but yet you're still one of the top 2 or 3 running games in the National Football League.
Yep. I could 100% see that. No question. And, you could be looking at it, not so much with Penny, but Swift, 700 rushing, I don't know, 600 receiving, 500 receiving, the ability. I think what you're going to see with Swift is a lot more home runs in terms of the running attack, and Penny's going to be more of your brute force guy. But nonetheless, I mean, you're Brian Johnson. You're stepping into a nice spot. You're stepping into runner-up MVP, best offensive line in football, 2,000 yard receivers, Dallas Goedert, and these 4 running backs. I don't know that any guy has stepped into a better spot than what he's stepping into.
Not that I can think of, unless you were an offensive coordinator for the New England Patriots during their heyday.
Right.
Josh McDaniels left, came back, offense still kept rolling. When you had Tom Brady and that collection of players on that offensive side of the ball, and let's face it, even when you look at that New England Patriots dynasty back then, they didn't always have a marquee receiver. They didn't have always a marquee running back. They had perfect role players for their system.
Yeah.
And their machine.
Troy Brown.
Yeah.
Wes Welker, Edelman.
Yeah. And so it's about the system. And this system has proven offensively that it can be one of the top offensive systems in the National Football League. You elevate a guy, the best thing is you elevated a guy who watched this thing blossom the way it did. So he understands the personnel. But again, he's got to make the decisions now. Nick has already said he's going to be calling the plays. He's got to make the decisions now. I would imagine Nick's going to be in his ear a little bit more than he was in Steichen's ear initially.
Yep.
But he's got to make the decisions. That's a big, big responsibility for him now.
Yeah, it's a big thing for the head coach. The head coach loses both of his coordinators, his confidants. That's a big deal. But I think that as I look at it right now, I think he's replaced both of those guys with very competent replacements. All right. Yeah. Good stuff there. Let's come back, Derek. We'll come back, talk a little Phillies, 2:00 NFL. Bunch of stuff to get into with the NFL. Mark Ingram will have a new home next year. We have some Brett Favre stuff. We will get into who we'd like to sit down with in NFL history. And then, of course, we'll continue with our greatest segment is the Washington Commanders / Redskins. We'll do all that when we come back. Don't go anywhere. He's Derek Gunn. I am Rob Ellis. We are Sports Take, JAKIB Sports YouTube Network. All right, let's talk about Pro Action Restoration. Yes, Pro Action Restoration. They are the place that you reach out to if your business, if your property that you own, if your house goes through the pain, the inconvenience of water, smoke, mold damage, fire, something you're not equipped to handle. The other great thing is, look, a lot of times these things happen at very inconvenient hours, right? But Pro Action Restoration is open and on call 24 hours, 7 days a week to assist. I went through it at my parents' house. I had water damage there in their basement. I called them on a Saturday. The crew got right out there. They cleaned it up. They were professional. The price was right. Could not have been a better experience. Pro Action Restoration is licensed, bonded, fully insured. They've been serving the tri-state area for more than 2 decades. Pro Action will work in conjunction with your insurance company also, which is huge. Whether it's water, fire, smoke damage, mold remediation, you name it, they can handle it. Give them a call, 610-623-3760, 610-623-3760, or online at proactionrestoration.com. That's proactionrestoration.com.